This is Suzanne Wagner, and I am doing my blog for the 30th of December 2022. My blog for today is called The Dancing Days of Old. I left for Berlin, Germany when I had just barely turned 18. I had no idea what I was in for. I just knew all the way to my toes that this was the path that I needed to leap on before that opportunity disappeared into the ethers. Even then, I knew that doors open, then close, and can completely disappear. Real opportunities are always shrouded in the unknown. This moment was something very important for me to try to do and leap out of New York City and into the great artistic world of Europe. My father had a phrase when he retired, which was way before this particular moment, but it was, "Happiness is Dallas in my rear view mirror," which was my hometown. I felt that way in that moment, but did not have those exact words at that time. Those moments that compel us are those moments when the planet Pluto is in charge. Pluto compels us to do things that seem to others scary, crazy, bizarre, risky, but one cannot let those who have never learned to face their own fears dictate the action of those with greater courage. I had only a letter of intent from the Berlin Ballet. I did not have a signed contract. It was going to be a huge leap of faith. I did not speak German. I had taken the ballet language of French in school. I had no place to live, no apartment set, and no clue as to what I was in for. We were still in the Cold War with Russia in 1978, and Berlin was a walled-off city caught between the Russians in East Berlin and the Allies, France, England, and the U.S. in the western part of the city. Berlin is at the same longitude as Winnipeg, Canada. I did not realize that at the time. That meant it was going to be cold, very cold. Coming from Texas, I knew it was further north. I knew I needed a greatcoat to stay warm, which I bought before I left, but I was clueless as to the fact that Berlin is on the plain between the cold, icy waters of the North Sea, the winds from Siberia, and the warm air that came up from the Mediterranean Sea, up and over the Alps and into the flats of East Germany. I did not fully grasp that the confluence of such massive weather patterns would make it beautifully green, but also very, very wet. In German, I learned that there were 8 different words for snow, 7 different words for types of hail, 6 different words for sleet, and 6 different words for drizzle. You know that you're going to another climate when you realize that. I decided to make a joke of those facts and just called it Scheißwetter, or shit weather. One has to learn to laugh, or one will instead become despondent, depressed, and lost in the circumstances in which we find ourselves. I am sure the native peoples of Canada and Alaska probably have even more types of descriptions for the various qualities of snow and ice. I got to Berlin the end of September 1978. It was Oktoberfest, and all the hotels were taken and all the pensions were full. Berlin was known for being a party town. Also, there was a terrible housing crisis and riots happening over those squatting on properties. I arrived at a very controversial moment in time for an Auslander, or a foreigner. I arrive at the airport after the worst flight of my life. I did not realize that part of the agreement that the Allies had with Russia was that to fly in, they would not fly up high, but stay at a lower altitude, which was in missile firing distance. That placed us in the very bumpy air of the lower altitudes, and only the best World War II U.S. pilots flew there at that time. They were all the ones that flew during the Berlin blockade, which was from 1948 through 1949. I had to laugh because most of them in the cockpit, you would see them, they had gray hair. And by the time they spoke, they either spoke with a southern U.S. accent or a Midwest, like Oklahoma, Kansas, Texas accent. I'm so grateful to their skill at landing us on the very short runway of Tegel Airport. I had never been so aware that I could, probably would, barf as that first flight into Berlin began. The truth was that all flights, all of them, for 4 years, were that bumpy. It was amazing that the plane stayed in one piece. The buffeting of the wind currents on the plains of East Germany are shocking. After landing and thanking God for allowing me to arrive safely, I went to the tourist bureau to see what accommodations were available to me. It never dawned on this American Texas girl that getting a hotel or an apartment would be next to impossible. I find myself in a room with 100 Turkish-looking men who are all smoking very strong tobacco cigarettes while I am filling out paperwork in German using my German-English dictionary. Most of these men all tried to talk to me in multiple languages, trying to see which language I recognized or responded to. It was very clear that they were all looking for anyone who they could marry and get another passport other than the Turkish one they had. The squatters' riots at that time were happening because after the war there were no German men who could help rebuild, so they brought in all these Turkish men, and immediately, right after the war, the German women literally rebuilt the town from the rubble, brick by brick. I learned just how amazingly strong the German women really were over time, and after understanding their history and what horrors they had gone through, I discovered that they had very good reasons to be often gruff and irritable. On one line of the paperwork, they asked my religion. I was raised Catholic and went to, for a time, to parochial school, so I put down Catholic. Much to my shock and gratitude, suddenly my name was the first called. Seems they had a room at St. Hildegard's Krankenhaus, or hospital, at the nunnery with the nuns that was available. This place was 4 U-Bahn stops or subway stops from the theater, which sounded close. But when I went to walk it, I discovered that it was over an hour walk from the theater to my room at the hospital. I was grateful for a place just to lay my head. Exhausted, I took a cab there, and the Mother Superior met me at the door as she was the only one who spoke English. She took me into a cold, dark, very quiet wing of the nunnery and showed me to my room that had a bed, a chair, and a table. There was one overhead light and a cross above the bed. The bathroom was down at the end of the hallway, and I was to share it with the 20 other nuns that worked there. She explained that a nun would be in charge of feeding me breakfast in the morning and asked me what times I wanted breakfast because the nuns were up at 5 a.m. for early Mass at 6 a.m. They would be using the bathroom at that time and would be in Mass from 6 a.m. to 7 a.m. I explained that I did not need to be at the theater until 9 a.m., so eating for me at 8 a.m. would be fine. To this day, I bless all those nuns that took such good care of me. Without them, I would have been so lost. The cost for staying there was 15 Deutschmarks a day, and that included breakfast. At that time, it was about 2 Deutschmarks to $1, so it was about $7.50 a day. That was an amazing deal. That first morning I went to breakfast only to discover that the sweet nun had literally created a German breakfast feast. Slices of rye bread, various cheeses, various deli meats, soft-boiled eggs, coffee, cream, and fresh orange juice. As a dancer, it was way too much food. But from that day, for the next 3 months, it was consistent. When I tried to tell them that I did not need that much food, they would smile and say, "Du bist zu dünn," meaning, you are too thin. I thought, I am a ballerina. I am supposed to be thin. It took me those 3 months to find an apartment in Berlin because owners did not want to rent to foreigners. So that was my introduction to Berlin. The nuns taught me German by pointing to an object and saying its name. They taught me how to navigate the subway system and to buy a ticket. They always waited for me at the door after performances because I would get home late and past their curfew. They were always sweet, kind, quiet, and accommodating. They liked me so much that they asked if I wanted to be a nun and stay. I understood what they were saying, as I was very quiet and respectful. I could see that in past lives, I had obviously been a nun because it was so easy to be with them. But I also knew that in this life I had signed up for something else. I could see how easy it would be to fall into a nun's life again. It was peaceful, supportive, kind-spirited, and a gentle life. But another life awaited me, and it had only just begun.